Hey everyone, it's Andre again. I just wanted to talk quickly about the upcoming videos. You see, we're going to start working on our sign-in page. And sign-in is something that is extremely common all across apps. Throughout your career, you're for sure going to need to create some sort of a sign-in form. Now, sign-in is a combination of creating forms, like this, and also doing something called user authentication, where we're able to register a user and also check if a user exists and let them sign in. Over the next couple of videos, we're going to try and solve this very common problem, and we're going to try and show the best way to do it with React, as well as later on using some sort of backend storage using Firebase to actually get this feature to work. Now, over the next couple of videos, we're going to assume that you know basic HTML forms. If you don't, I'll link to this resource so you can read up on it. But we assume that HTML forms is something that you're quite familiar with. And you're also familiar with things like event prevent default. And what you will see in the next couple of videos is a very common pattern that you'll use not just with this project, but with future projects as well. So when you see things like event prevent default and maybe you don't understand it, again, it's always good to make sure that you stop, pause, and maybe Google around. But for example, prevent default is used to stop the default behavior of an HTML form and potentially hijack it or prevent something from happening so we have more control over. But the most important thing that we're going to talk about, and something that you'll carry with you throughout your career, is this. As we're building this sign in and register functionality, these 3 points are going to be really evident. And I want you to really pay attention on what we're going to do to make sure that we create these components and the functionality using these 3 principles. For example, when it comes to deciding on components, we'll see that we have forms that are quite similar. We have buttons that are quite similar. Instead of coding them each individually, we're going to have components that are flexible enough to be able to use just one React component and style it or form it in different ways. Remember, React is all about reusable components. If we take a look at the code, which you're going to write over the next couple of videos, again, you won't have this yet. When we work on the sign-in component, we're going to get to a point where we have this form input component that we're going to create ourselves, a custom component, so that we go from having a simple HTML input component to something that is flexible, that we can pass in different properties to customize to our liking. For example, a register and a sign-in component. We also have a custom button where we can give it different customizations. In this case, it's only the sign-in, but this custom button can be used with our sign-in with Google as well as the sign-up eventually. So you're going to see how to decide on these components, how to make them reusable across our different app. But more importantly, we're going to really figure out these 2 things, deciding where the state should live and what changes when state changes. Again, this is code that we're going to write together. But you'll notice that we have a handle submit method and a handle change method. The one method is going to happen whenever somebody is typing information in the input box where we update the state. And another one, which is the handle submit, which will handle when somebody clicks on one of these buttons. So we're going to start with basic input HTML syntax and basic button HTML syntax to creating these custom reusable components that are able to react to user changing the state of the application. And the final thing I want to mention is this. Where do you think the state for the form lives? This is a very common problem with React. For example, we're going to have a sign-in page, as you can see here. And this sign-in page will be an entire component that contains these 2 forms. Now, each of these forms will have its own component. One will be the sign-in component, one the register component. But here's my question. If this was our sign-in page, and this was our sign-in, and this is our register, where should the state live? Where should the information that the user types in, for example in here, where should it live? Should it live in this component? Should it live in this component? Or should it live in this entire page component? Pause the video and think about that. Ready for the answer? The easiest way to think about this is to lift up the state only up to the point that the components need it. So when we create this component, we're going to actually keep the state in its own individual component. So sign in is going to have its own state, and register is going to have its own state. Why is that? Well, because these two things don't need to talk to each other. Sign in doesn't really care what we enter in register, and register doesn't care what's in the form of sign in. So if we lifted the state up and kept the state in the entire page, every time we update this and the state changes, both of these would get re-rendered. So that means 2 extra calculations that React has to do to re-render this and re-render this. If we kept state just in the sign-in, because that's the only place that we care about those changes, only this component is going to get re-rendered when we type something in here or click submit instead of this over here. Now, I want you to just notice this as we're building it, that Ihua is going to make these decisions and try to keep state to the lowest possible level, keeping the concern in place to whatever component needs it so that we're more efficient with your code. This is something that will come with practice. But remember, over the next couple of videos, notice how Ihua is going to keep these 3 principles in mind and build out the components. Let's get started.